My name is Dr. Nicholas Jenner and welcome to Therapy Shorts 56. Before we begin, I'd like to say something very clearly. If you've been in a narcissistic relationship and you're still confused, still grieving, still hanging on in there, or still questioning yourself, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. What you experienced was not simply a difficult relationship. It was a psychological dynamic that slowly reshaped how you thought, felt, and related to yourself. Narcissistic relationships do not end cleanly because they do not begin cleanly. They begin by meeting unmet needs. They deepen by person discernment, and they end by activating wounds that were never given language. Today we're not just talking about narcissism as a label. We're talking about how two unfinished developmental stories collide. One organised around control and the other around self-abandonment. We'll explore how narcissistic patterns form, why the adulation stage feels so powerful, how devaluation destabilizes the sense of self, and why discard hurts in ways that don't make logical sense. But more importantly, we're going to be talking about you and not them. Because healing doesn't begin with understanding the narcissist, even if many codependents spend most of their time trying to do that. It begins with understanding what this relationship awakened in you, and why it was so hard to leave. So take your time with this episode and perhaps listen to it a couple of times. Pause it when you need to. And clarity comes from safety and not from urgency. Narcissism does not develop out of confidence. It develops out of emotional insecurity. Clinically, narcissistic traits often form in early environments where a child's emotional world is not safely held. Needs may be dismissed, inconsistently met, or only acknowledged when they serve the caregiver's self-image. In some families, the child is valued for achievement, but not known emotionally. In others, vulnerability is shamed or ignored. And in some, the child is idolized, not for who they are, but for how well they reflect the parent. What these environments share is, the child does not feel safe being a separate emotional being. So the child adapts. They learn to manage shame by building a self-image rather than a self. They learn to regulate anxiety through admiration, control, or emotional distance. And they learn that intimacy is dangerous because it exposes dependency. Over time, this creates a personality structure that relies on external regulation. The narcissistic adult does not relate in order to connect. They relate in order to stabilize their internal world. And this is why intimacy initially feels intoxicating and later intolerable. When a narcissistic person enters a relationship, the adulation stage serves a very specific psychological function. It's not simply seduction, it's regulation. By idealizing another person, the narcissistic partner temporarily escapes shame and emptiness. By mirroring, they create closeness without vulnerability. By accelerating intimacy, they avoid the slow exposure that real connection requires. And this is why adulation feels extraordinary. You suddenly feel deeply seen, chosen, and understood, often more intensely than ever before. But clinically, this is not attunement, it's strategic responsiveness. The nervous system is flooded with dopamine before safety has been established. And healthy love regulates the nervous system, and this adulation stimulates it. And for people with unresolved attachment wounds like codependence, stimulation feels like connection, because calm was never safe. Let's talk about codependency and narcissism. Codependency does not develop from weakness. It develops from early responsibility. Many codependents grew up in environments where emotional safety depended on attunement and compliance. They learned to scan moods, to anticipate needs, and to minimize themselves to preserve connection. So when they encounter adulation, it feels like relief. For the first time, they are chosen without effort, valued without striving, held without disappearing. But this taps directly into unmet developmental needs. Clinically, what happens here is attachment fusion. The codependent nervous system mistakes intensity for safety because safety was never calm, it was conditional. So when devaluation begins, the response is not anger or withdrawal, it's self-questioning. What did I do wrong? How do I fix this? How do I get back to who they were? And this is where the trauma bond forms and leads into the next stage. Devaluation rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with cooling. Attunement fades. Warmth disappears. Small criticisms replace curiosity. Psychologically, this happens when intimacy activates shame in the narcissistic partner. Closeness exposes vulnerability. Equality threatens control. Dependency feels annihilating. So the narcissistic system offloads that shame. Praise becomes comparison. Presence becomes withdrawal. Connection becomes power. For the codependent, this is devastating because it activates an old belief that love must be earned. So they try harder and harder and harder. And because of that trying harder, they shrink, they appease, they abandon themselves to restore connection. But the more they disappear, the more the narcissistic partner regains control, and the deeper devaluation goes. Eventually, discard will happen. And discard is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's silent, sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it's replacement. But psychologically, it serves the same function. The narcissistic partner disengages when the relationship no longer regulates them or serves them any purpose. And for the codependent, discard is not just loss, it's reliving abandonment. The nervous system does not process it as an ending, it processes it as rejection, failure, and worthlessness. And this is why people miss the relationship even when it was painful and awful. Not because it was loving, but because it activated something unfinished. Repetition compulsion. The inner child does not experience discard as choice, he experiences it as disappearance. As we come to the end of this episode, I want to leave you with something steady. If you're still thinking about them, still missing them, or still replaying the relationship, that does not mean you want them back. It means a part of you is still trying to understand what happened. Narcissistic relationships fracture the internal compass. They train you to doubt your perceptions, override your boundaries, and measure your worth through someone else's responses. Healing is not about becoming harder or more detached. It's about becoming more present with yourself. Recovery begins when you stop asking, why did they do this? And start asking, what did I learn to tolerate in order to stay connected? The question isn't about blame, it's about reclaiming agency. The opposite of narcissistic abuse is not perfect love, it's self-trust. And when self-trust begins to return, the cycle loses its grip, quietly, gradually, and for good. Thank you for listening. See you next time.